Hey everyone, thank you for being here with me tonight. I really appreciate you spending your time on these cases. Tonight we have 14 separate stories to go through. These cases come from all over the world, and they are all very strange. Some of them are dark, and all of them are very real. We are going to travel from the mountains of Europe to the islands of the Pacific. Every single one of these accounts is a deep dive into the unknown. I hope you are ready for a long night of storytelling. Before we get into it, do me a small favor. Please gently tap the like button, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you are new here. If you click that like button hard enough, it might turn into a tiny silver key. That key will unlock a door to a room filled with every missing sock you ever lost. Also, tell me in the comments where you are watching from right now. Check your doors and windows to make sure they are locked. If you have a security camera, take a quick look at the feed. Outside your window, the rain has started to fall. At first, it is just a few light drops on the glass. Then it turns into a steady and soft curtain of sound. The water runs down the pane in long and slow streaks. That sound will stay with us during all of these stories tonight. The camera pulls away from your room and moves into the rainy night. It travels across the ocean and high into the cold mountains of Switzerland. We are moving toward a silent cemetery in a region called Valais. The air here is freezing and the ground is hard. A cemetery caretaker was walking through the fog of a Swiss mountain cemetery. The sun was just beginning to rise over the jagged peaks of the Alps. It was early January in 2007. Most people in the village were still asleep in their warm beds. The caretaker liked the quiet of the morning shift. He checked the rows of headstones to make sure everything was in order. This was a place of deep peace and very old traditions. But as he rounded a corner, he saw something that did not belong. There was a fresh grave that had been disturbed during the night. The dirt was not smooth, like it had been the day before. Someone had moved the heavy soil away from the headstone. The caretaker stopped and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He looked down and saw deep gouge marks in the frozen earth. It looked like someone had been digging with their bare hands. He did not want to look closer, but he knew he had to. He reached for his radio to call the local police. Why would someone dig up the dead but leave the expensive valuables behind? This was the question that started to haunt the small town. The people of Valais were very private and respected their ancestors. The idea of someone touching a grave was unthinkable to them. Investigators arrived and began to look for clues in the mud. They expected to find that jewelry or gold teeth had been stolen. Grave robbers usually want items they can sell for a quick profit. But as they opened the casket, they saw something much worse. The woman inside had been buried only 48 hours earlier. She was an elderly grandmother who was well loved by her family. Her expensive rings were still on her fingers. Her gold necklace was still draped around her neck. The thief had ignored all of the things that had monetary value. Instead, they had focused on the physical body of the woman. A large section of her long gray hair had been roughly cut away. Her clothing had been shifted, as if someone had been looking for a souvenir. The police were confused by the strange nature of the crime. They did not have a name for this kind of behavior yet. They hoped it was just a single act of a disturbed person. But over the next few weeks, more reports started to come in. Another grave was found open in a nearby village. Then another one was discovered 3 miles away in a different valley. Every single time, the victim was an elderly woman who was recently buried. And every single time, the thief only took locks of hair. The local media began to call the perpetrator the vampire of Valais. People were terrified to bury their loved ones in the open ground. Some families started taking turns sitting in the graveyards at night. They brought blankets and flashlights to watch over the fresh dirt. The police increased their patrols along the winding mountain roads. They looked for any car parked near a cemetery after the sun went down. But the thief was very quiet and knew the terrain very well. He seemed to move like a ghost. The investigation hit a wall because there were no witnesses at all. The thief did not leave footprints that were easy to track. He seemed to understand when the police patrols were passing by. The officers decided to change their tactics and go undercover. They hid inside of small tool sheds near the newest grave sites. They waited in the freezing cold for hours, without moving a muscle. One night a young officer saw a shadow moving near the edge of the woods. A man was walking slowly toward a fresh plot. The man was carrying a small bag and a pair of heavy scissors. He did not look like a monster or a classic movie villain. He looked like an ordinary person you might pass on the street. The officer waited until the man started to scrape at the dirt. Then he stepped out from the shadows and ordered him to stop. The man did not try to run away or fight back. He just stood there with a blank expression on his face. He looked almost relieved that someone had finally caught him. The police took the man into custody and searched his small bag. Inside, they found several small trinkets and pieces of cheap ribbon. These were things that had been buried with the women in the graves. The man was a local resident who lived alone in a small house. He did not have a criminal record and worked a normal job. When the detectives began to interview him, he was very polite. He spoke about the dead women as if they were his close friends. He said he just wanted to keep them close. The vampire would spend his days reading the local obituary section. He looked for the names of elderly women who had recently passed away. He would attend their funerals from a distance to see where they were buried. Once the sun went down, he would return to the cemetery with his tools. He worked quickly to reach the casket before the dirt settled. He would talk to the bodies while he cut their hair. He believed that he was collecting the essence of their lives. He felt a deep connection to them. The police went to the man's home to conduct a full search. They were prepared for something strange, but not for what they found. Every room in the house was filled with thousands of locks of hair. They were organized by color and length, and tied with little strings. There were also hundreds of photographs of the women taken from their graves. The man had created a macabre museum dedicated to the elderly dead. It was the result of a severe necrophilic fetish that had gone unchecked. Now let's pause for a moment and really think about this. I want you to imagine the horror of visiting a grave. You go there to leave flowers for your mother or grandmother. You look down, and you see fingers sticking out of the dirt. You realize that while you were sleeping, someone was down there. They were touching the person you loved and taking a piece of them. I do not know about you, but that thought is absolutely terrifying. It ruins the idea of a final resting place. The man was evaluated by several top forensic psychologists. They determined that he suffered from a very rare and severe disorder. He did not see his actions as a crime or an insult. In his mind, he was protecting the women from being forgotten. He was not fit to stand trial in a traditional criminal court. The judge ordered him to be placed in a high-security mental institution. He was given professional help to deal with his obsession with the dead. The community finally felt like they could breathe again. The aftermath of the case changed the way the region handled burials. Many of the old cemeteries installed high-tech security cameras. They put up motion sensors that would alert the police to any movement. Families began to use heavy concrete liners for their caskets to prevent digging. The story of the vampire of Valais became a dark legend in the Alps. People still talk about the man who wanted a museum of hair. They make sure their locks are tight and their gates are closed. A flash of silver jewelry caught the light in the evidence room. It was a ring that had been recovered from the man's house. It was returned to a family who thought it was lost forever. But as they held the ring, they thought about the other items. They thought about the hair that could never be put back. We leave the cold mountains of Switzerland and travel toward the city of Paris. We are moving from a museum of hair to a cheap hotel room. Inside that room is a treasure worth millions of dollars. A maid was knocking on the heavy wooden door of a cheap Paris hotel room. It was early March in 2007. The hotel was located near the busy tracks of the Gare du Nord station. The air smelled like diesel fumes and old stone. No one answered her knock, even though the guest had not checked out. She used her master key and pushed the door open a few inches. The room was small and dark, with the curtains drawn tight. She expected to see a sleeping traveler or perhaps an empty bed. Instead, she found a man lying perfectly still on the thin mattress. He was fully clothed and looked like he was resting, but his skin had a pale and waxy color that suggested he was gone. The maid backed out of the room and called for the manager immediately. They waited for the police to arrive in the narrow hallway. When the officers finally entered, they noticed something incredible. The walls of the dive were covered in paper. There were sketches and drawings pinned everywhere. They looked like original works of art. A dead man was found in a $5 room surrounded by $50 million in art. This was not the typical scene of a lonely overdose. The investigators looked at the sketches of human faces and abstract shapes. They saw the distinctive signatures of world-famous masters. There were lithographs by Picasso and bold sketches by Andy Warhol. The room was a chaotic gallery of stolen treasures. It was a sight that most museum curators only dream of seeing. But the man in the center of it all was cold. How did a world-class thief end up dying alone in a cheap dive like this? The detectives began to look through the few belongings the man had left behind. He had no identification and no credit cards in his wallet. He had lived like a ghost in the heart of one of the busiest cities. His clothes were high quality, but very worn and dirty. It was clear he had been staying in the hotel for several weeks. He rarely left the room and never asked for housekeeping. He was hiding in plain sight. The story goes back to the early months of 2007 in Paris. The city was experiencing a strange wave of high-end thefts. Small galleries were reporting missing sketches and rare prints. These were pieces that were easy to carry and hide under a coat. The thief never tripped an alarm or broke a window. He seemed to know exactly when the guards were taking their breaks. He moved through the galleries with the grace of a professional. The police had no leads and no suspects. The man was a ghost who moved through the art world without a trace. He did not drive a car or use a cell phone to plan his jobs. He walked the streets and blended into the crowds of tourists. He would spend hours staring at a single piece of art before he took it. He was not looking for a way to disable the security. He was looking at the lines and the colors of the work itself. He seemed to have a deep and personal connection to the masters he robbed. The thief stopped checking in with his few underworld contacts. These were the men who usually helped him sell stolen goods for cash. They started to wonder if he had been caught or if he had left the country. He had always been a solitary figure, but this silence was different. He had completely vanished from the criminal network of Paris. He had retreated into the shadows of the hotel near the train station. He had stopped being a thief and became a dedicated collector. The crime scene in the hotel room was a puzzle for the art experts. They were called in to verify the sketches found on the walls. They wore white gloves as they carefully removed the pins from the paper. Every single piece was an authentic work by a legendary artist. Some of the sketches had not even been reported missing yet. The galleries did not even know they were gone. The thief had been so efficient that the owners were still unaware of their massive losses. The investigators realized the art was never for sale to the highest bidder. There were no ledgers and no lists of potential buyers in the room. There was no correspondence with wealthy collectors in other countries. The man had kept every single piece he had ever stolen. He had surrounded his bed with the most valuable sketches in the world. They were his only friends and his only family. He lived in poverty just so he could wake up and see a Picasso leaning against a radiator. The police began to piece together a reenactment of his final days. The thief would sit at the small wooden desk and eat cheap canned food. He would talk to the Warhol prints as if they could hear him. He would spend his nights studying the brush strokes by candlelight. He did not care about the millions of dollars they were worth. He only cared about the beauty of the lines on the page. He was a man who had been consumed by his own obsession with art. The conclusion of the investigation revealed a tragic and lonely end. The man had died from an accidental overdose of strong barbiturates. He had been taking them to help him sleep in the noisy hotel. He took too many one night and simply never woke up again. He took the secrets of his life and his clients to the grave. No one ever found out his real name or where he came from. He was a man who existed only through the masterpieces he owned. Now let's pause for a moment and look at this. I want you to really think about the mind of this man. I do not know about you, but I can't imagine loving an object so much. You would live in a dirty room and starve just to look at a drawing. He could have sold one piece and lived in a mansion for 10 years, but he chose to die in a dive surrounded by paper. That level of devotion to an object is truly hard to understand. Most of the recovered art was returned to the Louvre and other private collections. The galleries were shocked to receive calls about their missing inventory. The sketches were cleaned and placed back behind thick security glass. The story of the companion thief remains a legend in the art world of France. He is remembered as the man who loved art more than his own life. His death left a trail of recovered masterpieces, but no answers. The mystery of his identity still lingers in Paris. A Picasso sketch leaned against a radiator in the empty hotel room. It was the last thing the man saw before he closed his eyes forever. The police eventually cleared out the room, and the hotel moved on. We leave the busy streets of Paris and travel south. We are moving toward the grand estates of the Loire Valley. The air is cleaner here, but the secrets are much darker. A splash of red paint on a wooden floor leads us to a different kind of collector. We leave the gray streets of Paris and travel toward the Loire Valley. The air is much cleaner here, but the secrets are much darker. Huge stone estates sit quietly among the trees in the morning fog. This is a place where old families keep their business hidden. We are moving toward a grand property near the town of Chambord. A bridge crosses over the muddy water of the Loire River. Below the surface, something heavy is resting in the thick silt. It is a car that does not belong in the river. Divers pull a dark blue car from the river onto the bank. The metal is covered in green weeds and cold river mud. They pry open the heavy trunk to see what is inside. A large metal chainsaw is lying in a pool of water. It is not just covered in rust and river silt. There are dark red stains on the blade and the motor. A technician realizes those stains are not from a simple oil leak. He suspects that he is looking at human blood and bone. Why was a chainsaw covered in human DNA in a grandmother's car? This question began to circulate through the local police station in town. The car belonged to a woman who seemed completely harmless and kind. She was known for her polite smile and her very neat home. Neighbors described her as a woman who never raised her voice once. But the evidence in the trunk told a much different story. It pointed toward a level of violence that shocked the entire region. The police knew they had to find her immediately. The story begins in September of 2007 in France. The weather was turning cold as the leaves began to change. Simone Weber was living a quiet life in her grand stone house. She spent her days tending to her garden and her flowers. To the people who lived nearby, she was just a grandmother. They saw her walking her small dog along the quiet country roads. She was respected as a person of high social standing and grace. No one knew about the darkness she carried inside. Simone was a woman who valued her privacy and her social reputation. She kept her large estate in perfect condition for any occasional guests. Her garden was filled with bright flowers and very neatly trimmed hedges. She was often seen wearing elegant clothes and expensive strands of pearls. People in the village thought she was a very wealthy widow. They did not ask many questions about her late husband or her past. They simply accepted the polite version of the woman she presented. The house was a beautiful example of local architecture. From many years ago, it had high ceilings and large windows that overlooked the flowing river. Simone lived there with her memories and her many expensive antique pieces. She was a woman who liked to have things in order. If a chair was moved an inch, she would fix it immediately. This need for control extended to every single part of her life. It also extended to the men she invited into her private world. Simone had been romantically involved with a local man for several months. He was a quiet man who enjoyed the peace of the countryside. Their neighbors often saw them walking together near the river at sunset. They seemed like a perfectly normal couple, enjoying their golden years together. The man was known for being very kind and very helpful to others. He often helped Simone with the heavy lifting around her large stone estate. No one saw any signs of trouble between them. But beneath the surface of their relationship, there was a growing tension. Simone was a woman who demanded total loyalty from her romantic partners. She did not like it when the man spent time alone. If he went to visit his own family, she would become angry. She wanted to be the center of his entire world at all times. The man began to feel like he was being slowly trapped. He started to make plans to leave the estate for good. The man disappeared in early September of 2007 without a word. His family tried to call him, but his phone was turned off. They went to Simone's house to ask if she knew his location. She met them at the front door with a polite smile. She told them that they had a very small disagreement lately. She claimed that the man had packed his bags and left town. She said he wanted to start a new life elsewhere. The family did not believe her story because he left his dog. They knew he would never go anywhere without his faithful animal friend. They went to the local police and filed a missing person report. The officers started by checking the roads leading away from the small village. They found no sign of the man at any train or bus. Then a fisherman reported seeing something blue in the deep river water. This led the divers to the submerged car and the saw. The police arrived at Simone's estate with a search warrant in hand. She did not look worried as she let them into her home. She offered them tea and sat down in her favorite velvet chair. She told the detectives that she had no idea about the car. She claimed that someone must have stolen it from her driveway recently. She spoke with a calm and steady voice that was very convincing. She looked like a victim of a crime herself that day. The detectives began to walk through the many rooms of the stone house. They looked for any signs of a struggle or a quick cleanup. Everything was in its place, and the floors were perfectly clean. They moved outside to the large garden and the private boat dock. They noticed that the grass was very short and recently mown. Then one officer saw a small garden incinerator near the back fence. It was still warm to the touch from a recent fire. The forensic team began to examine the metal chainsaw found in the car. They took samples of the dark red stains from the metal teeth. The lab results confirmed that the blood belonged to the missing man. There were also tiny fragments of human bones stuck in the motor. The detectives realized the man had been dismembered with the heavy power tool. This was not the work of a random car thief at all. This was a very personal and brutal act of murder. The police went back to the garden incinerator to look for evidence. They carefully removed the gray ash and sifted through it for hours. They found several small pieces of bone that had not fully burned. They also found a metal button from a man's heavy winter coat. The lab confirmed that the bone fragments were human in their origin. They had found the final resting place of the man who disappeared. He had been burned in the backyard of the estate. The investigation took a turn when they looked into Simone's past records. They discovered that she had been a suspect in another case years ago. Her previous husband had died under very strange and sudden circumstances back then. She had been accused of his murder, but was eventually acquitted of it. The media had nicknamed her the Black Widow during that legal trial. She had walked free and moved to the Loire Valley to start over. She was a master of hiding. The detectives found a rental receipt inside a kitchen drawer in the house. It was for the exact same chainsaw found in the blue car. The receipt was dated the day after the man was last seen. The clerk at the rental shop remembered a polite older woman. He said she asked for the most powerful saw in the store. She told him that she had some old furniture to dispose of. She paid for the rental in cash and left the shop. The police were now able to piece together the entire horrific event. The man had told Simone that he was leaving her that night. She had fly into a rage because she could not lose him. She had attacked him in a moment of pure and cold anger. After the man was dead, she realized she had a problem. She needed to get rid of the evidence in her home. She decided to treat him like a piece of unwanted furniture. Simone went to the rental shop the next morning to get the saw. She returned to the estate and moved the body to the garden. She used the power tool to break him down into small pieces. She then spent hours feeding the pieces into the metal garden incinerator. She watched the smoke rise over the trees while she drank her tea. She thought she was erasing the man from the world for good. She was cleaning up a mess in her life. Once the fire was out, she cleaned the chainsaw in the house. She put the saw in her car and drove to the river. She put the car in neutral and pushed it into the water. She walked back to her house in the dark country night. She believed that the river would hide her secrets forever in mud. She went to bed and woke up the next day as usual. She went back to her garden and her polite smiles. The truth was finally revealed when the bone fragments matched the man's DNA. The police arrested Simone in front of her, shocked and quiet neighbors. She did not scream or cry as they put on the cuffs. She simply asked for her coat and walked to the police car. She maintained her polite exterior even as she was being charged. She acted as if the entire thing was a very large mistake. She never showed a single moment of regret or any sorrow. Now let's pause for a moment and look at this situation. I want you to really think about the deep irony here. Simone was known for being the most polite person in town. She spent her time making the garden look absolutely perfect for visitors. But while the flowers were blooming, she was burning a human being. The very thing that made her look kind was her mask. I don't know about you, but that fact is truly chilling. We trust people because they are polite to us. The legal trial of the Black Widow captivated the entire country of France. The courtroom was packed with people who wanted to see the polite killer. Prosecutors presented the chainsaw and the bone fragments found in the ash. They spoke about her previous acquittal and her cold and calculated nature. Simone sat in the dock and looked like a harmless grandmother the whole time. She claimed that she was being framed by the man's angry family. She lied with every single word she spoke. The jury did not believe her lies this time because of the science. The DNA on the chainsaw was impossible for her to explain away. She was found guilty of murder and the destruction of human remains. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment in a high-security facility. She was stripped of her elegant clothes and her expensive white pearls. She became just another number in the cold and gray prison system. The Black Widow would never see her beautiful garden again. The aftermath of the case left a lingering emotional impact on the village. People looked at their polite neighbors with a new sense of deep suspicion. They realized that a grand estate could hide a very dark furnace. The stone house near the river was sold to a new owner, but no one wanted to live there after learning about the smoke. It remains a dark landmark in the history of the Loire Valley. The story is a reminder that evil can wear a smile. A bone fragment in the ash was the final piece of the puzzle. It was a tiny thing that led to a very big conviction in court. The police eventually closed the file, and the village tried to forget. We leave the grand estates of France and travel across the globe. We are moving from the ash of an incinerator to heavy, wet concrete. The air is humid and smells like the sea and industrial dust. A blue plastic barrel is being pulled from a pit. A heavy cloud of gray ash settles over the quiet garden in France. We move away from that dark furnace and travel thousands of miles east. We find ourselves at a busy construction site in Chonburi, Thailand. The sun is hot and the air is thick with the smell of dust. Workers are busy pouring concrete for a new industrial foundation. One man notices a large blue plastic drum sitting in the dirt. It is very heavy and seems to be filled with something solid. He picks up a jackhammer to break it open for disposal. He has no idea what is waiting inside. The steel tip of the jackhammer hits the surface of the plastic drum. A loud cracking sound echoes across the busy construction site. A foul and heavy odor immediately begins to leak out from the cracks. It is the unmistakable smell of death mixed with damp chemicals. The worker drops his tool and covers his face with his shirt. He calls over his supervisor to look at the strange blue barrel. They pull back a piece of the broken plastic and see gray concrete. But something is poking out from the center of the solid block of gray stone. It is the pale and skeletal remains of a human hand reaching out. The fingers are frozen in a grip, as if trying to push away. The workers realize they are not looking at a simple piece of trash. They are looking at a very intentional and very brutal burial site. They immediately stop all work and call the local Chonburi police. Detectives arrive and cordoned off the area with yellow tape. They have to use heavy power tools to break the rest of the concrete. It takes several hours of careful work to reveal the body inside. Who would go through the effort of entombing a person in a drum? This was the question that the investigators kept asking themselves. This was not a quick murder in a dark alleyway. This required a plan and a lot of heavy lifting. The drum weighed over 300 pounds with the concrete inside. It had been hidden in a shallow pit and covered with dirt. The killer wanted this person to stay hidden for a very long time. They wanted the weight of the world to press down on the victim. This was a message for someone. The story goes back to July of 2007 in Thailand. The industrial province was growing rapidly with many new buildings going up, but the region also had a very dark and violent side. Local mafia groups and debt collectors operated in the shadows. They lent money to workers and small business owners at high rates. If a person could not pay, they would face severe consequences. These groups were known for their ruthless methods and their total lack of mercy. They preferred to make their victims disappear without any trace. The woman in the barrel was a local resident named Suni. She worked hard to support her family in the busy industrial district. Suni was known for being a very friendly and very helpful neighbor. But she had a secret problem that was slowly taking over her life. She had started to visit local gambling dens to make extra money. She hoped to win enough to buy a small house for her children. Instead, she found herself falling into a very deep hole of debt. She began to borrow money from the wrong people. The loan sharks were happy to give her the money at first. They told her she could take as much as she needed to play, but the interest rates were doubling every single week. Suni soon realized that she owed more than she could ever earn. She started to receive threatening phone calls at all hours of the night. Men in dark cars would park outside of her small home. They did not say anything, but they watched her every move. She knew that her time was running out very quickly now. One night, in the middle of 2006, she vanished. Suni had received a phone call from an unknown number at midnight. She told her children that she had to meet a friend. She walked out of her front door and into the warm night. She was never seen alive by her family or friends again. Her children went to the police the very next morning to report. They searched the local hospitals and the nearby woods for any sign. But Suni had vanished into the dark influence of the province. The discovery of the blue plastic drum changed the entire investigation. The police used dental records to confirm that the body was Suni. She had been missing for over a year by that point. The autopsy revealed that she had died from blunt force trauma. Her skull had been fractured by a very heavy and flat object. But the most terrifying detail was the concrete itself. The medical examiner found traces of the dust in her lungs. This suggested that she might have been alive when they poured it. The detectives began to look at the concrete and the plastic drum. They found a serial number on the side of the blue barrel. This led them to a chemical company located nearby. They checked the delivery logs from the time Suni went missing. A large shipment of these barrels had been sent to a warehouse. That warehouse was owned by a man known for collecting gambling debts. He was a mid-level figure in the local organized crime scene. The police had found their first real lead in the case. The investigation moved into the high-stakes world of the Thai mafia. Officers interviewed several former associates of the debt collector in private. They were terrified to speak, but one man finally broke the silence. He described a specific execution method called the blue barrel treatment. He said it was used for people who were seen as a warning. The debt collectors would kidnap the victim and take them to a site. They would force the person into the drum and fill it up. This was meant to be a permanent tomb. The witness gave the police the names of the men involved. He described how they had waited for Suni outside her house. They had told her that the boss wanted to talk about debt. She had gone with them because she thought she had no choice. They drove her to a remote industrial lot in the province. There they beat her until she could no longer stand up. Then they brought out the plastic drum and the heavy concrete. They wanted her to pay for the money she had lost. The reenactment of the crime was a cold and steady process. The men had mixed the concrete in a small, portable mixer. They placed Suni into the drum while she was still breathing. Then they began to shovel the wet gray stone over her body. She would have felt the heat and the weight of it immediately. The concrete would have pressed the air right out of her chest. They sealed the lid and waited for the mixture to become solid. Then they rolled the barrel into the shallow pit. The conclusion of the case revealed a very sad and dark truth. Suni had been murdered over a debt of $500. That was the price of her life to the debt collectors. They had spent more money on the concrete than she actually owed. But they did not care about the money in the end. They cared about the reputation and the fear they created. They wanted everyone in the gambling dens to know the risk. They were willing to kill a mother over a small loss. Now, let us pause for a moment and really think about this. I want you to consider the dark side of human nature. We often believe that a person's life has a great value. We think that murder requires a massive motive or a big reason. But in this case, a woman died for less than a phone. A group of men worked together to bury her in stone. They did it with the same casual attitude as a day job. I do not know about you, but that is truly chilling. The lack of empathy is hard to imagine. The police raided the warehouse and arrested 3 men for murder. They were all members of the local debt collection gang. The leader of the group was a man who felt he was untouchable. He sat in the police station and laughed at the detectives. He believed that his connections would protect him from any jail, but the evidence of the blue drum was too strong to ignore. The serial numbers and the witness testimony sealed their dark fate. The trial began several months later in a crowded court. The legal outcome was a victory for the family of the victim. All three men were found guilty of premeditated murder and kidnapping. They were sentenced to life imprisonment in a high-security prison. The judge spoke about the extreme cruelty of the burial method. He said it was one of the most heartless crimes he saw. The men did not show any emotion as the sentence was read. They were led away in heavy chains to start their long terms. The family finally had a small bit of justice. The aftermath of the case led to a major regional crackdown. The police targeted the dark influence figures in the province. They closed down several illegal gambling dens and credit rings. They wanted to send a message that the mafia was not in charge. But the memory of the blue barrel remains in the local mind. People still look at construction sites with a sense of fear. They wonder what else might be hidden under the heavy concrete. The story of Suni is a dark part of history. The skeletal hand reaching out was the final image for the workers. It was a cry for help that took a year to be heard. The police eventually finished their report and the site was closed. We leave the humid air of Thailand and travel across the sea. We are moving from the heavy weight of concrete to a car. The traffic in the city of Manila is loud and very fast. A silver helmet glints in the sun as a motorcycle weaves through. An SUV is waiting at a long red light. The camera pulls away from the dusty industrial pits of Thailand. It travels across the blue waters of the South China Sea. We are moving toward the dense urban sprawl of Manila. The air here is thick with heat and the smell of exhaust. Thousands of cars are packed onto the narrow streets of the city. We see a silver helmet glinting in the bright tropical sun. A motorcycle weaves between the heavy buses and colorful local jeepneys. It moves with a strange and very focused kind of speed. An SUV is waiting at a very long red light. The driver of the SUV looks at the clock on his dashboard. It is high noon on a very hot day in May. The traffic in Quezon City has come to a complete stop. Suddenly, the motorcycle with the silver helmet pulls up to the side. There are two men on the bike wearing heavy dark jackets. One man reaches into his waistband and pulls out a heavy handgun. He fires 2 shots through the driver's side window of the car. The glass shatters into thousands of tiny pieces onto the hot road. The motorcycle then vanishes into the sea of idling vehicles. The victim slumped over the steering wheel as the light turned green. His name was Jose Maria Zaragoza, and he was a famous man. People in the Philippines knew him as the Ice Cream King. He had built a massive empire of dessert parlors across the country. He was a wealthy businessman who was respected by his many employees. But on this afternoon, he was just another victim of street violence. The shooter had been professional and fast and very cold. Why would anyone want a man who sold ice cream to be dead? The story goes back to May 14th in 2007. The Philippines was a place of great beauty and also deep danger. Business disputes were often settled with violence rather than in a court. Jose Maria Zaragoza was leaving his office for a lunch meeting. He felt safe in his heavy SUV behind the tinted glass windows. He did not know that he had been followed for miles. The hitmen had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike him. They found it at a busy intersection in the middle of town. Jose had spent his entire life building his successful family business. He started with a single small shop and grew it into a chain. His brand was a household name that everyone in the Manila recognized. He was known for being a very tough but fair negotiator. But his success had also brought him many powerful and jealous enemies. In the months before his death, he was involved in a fight. It was a bitter land dispute with a very large corporation. They wanted the land where his main factory was currently sitting. The crime scene was absolute chaos in the minutes after the shots. Dozens of witnesses had been standing just a few feet away. They saw the motorcycle pull up and heard the loud bangs. But none of them could provide a clear description of the men. The shooters had kept their full-face helmets on the whole time. They looked like any other commuters on the busy city streets. The police arrived and found the engine of the SUV still running. The ice cream king was gone before the ambulance even arrived. The detectives began to look into the world of contract killers. In Manila, this was known as the riding in tandem tactic. It was a common way for professional hits to be carried out. One man would drive the bike while the other fired the gun. This allowed them to escape through narrow alleys and heavy traffic. The police knew they were looking for a team of professionals. These were men who did not make mistakes or leave fingerprints. They were hired to do a job, and they did it well. The investigation hit a wall because the motorcycle had no license plate. The witnesses only remembered the silver color of the driver's helmet. The police checked the local security cameras along the main road. They saw the bike moving through the traffic at a high speed, but the resolution was too low to see any facial features. It seemed like the killers had vanished into the humid air. The family of Jose Maria Zaragoza pleaded for any information from public. They offered a large reward for the capture of the shooters. A breakthrough finally came from a trash can near the getaway route. A street sweeper found a small burner phone hidden under some paper. He turned it over to the police, who checked the history. They found several calls made to a single number in the city. Those calls happened just minutes before and after the fatal shooting. The detectives traced the signal to a small apartment in a district. They realized they were finally closing in on the killers of Jose. The phone was a vital piece of evidence for them. The police raided the apartment and found the silver helmet inside. They also found a dark jacket that matched the witness reports. 2 men were taken into custody and brought to the station. They were local criminals who had long records of violent acts. During the interrogation, one of them started to get very nervous. He admitted that they were hired to perform the hit. He said they were paid several $1,000s for the job, but he claimed he did not know who the boss was. The detectives used the phone records to move up the chain. They found that the hit was ordered by a business rival. This man had been losing money because of Jose's recent expansion. He decided that the easiest way to win was through murder. He had used a middleman to find the 2 motorcycle gunmen. The plan had been in the works for over 3 months. They had studied Jose's daily routine and his favorite driving routes. They knew exactly where the traffic was the slowest that day. The reenactment of the crime revealed a cold and calculated process. The hitman had waited at the office exit for Jose to leave. They trailed him from a distance of 50 feet for miles. When he stopped at the red light, they moved into position. The shooter did not hesitate for even a single second then. He fired 2 precise shots to ensure the job was done. Then, they took a shortcut through a shopping mall parking lot. They believed they had committed the perfect crime in the sun. The conclusion of the case was a shock to the business world. A successful corporate hit had happened in the middle of the day. It showed how easily a life could be ended for profit. The ice cream king was dead because of a land dispute. His empire was left without a leader in a single moment. The men who pulled the trigger were just tools for someone. The real monster was the man who had paid the money. He had sat in his office while the shots were fired. Now let us pause for a moment and really think about this. I want you to imagine doing your job every single day. You work hard to build something and take care of people. Then one day you stop at a red light like everyone else. In a single second, everything you built is taken away from you. I do not know about you, but that is a terrifying thought. We think we are safe behind the glass of our own cars, but a person with a motive can change that very quickly. The gunmen were never convicted because the main witness disappeared soon. This is a common and tragic ending in many local cases there. The professional hitmen often have friends in very high places, but the mastermind was eventually sued in a civil court later. He lost a large portion of his wealth to the family. The legal system struggled to prove the criminal charges in court. The family of Jose Maria Zaragoza felt that justice was incomplete. They had lost a father and a very successful leader. The aftermath of the case changed the security for many people. Wealthy business owners started to hire armed guards for their cars. They no longer felt safe driving themselves through the city traffic. The ice cream chain continues to operate under new management now, but the shops are all equipped with heavy security and cameras. The story of the Ice Cream King is a dark warning. It reminds everyone that success can sometimes bring a very high price. The traffic in Manila still flows around that intersection. A silver helmet glinting in the sun was the only clue. It was a small detail that led to a massive investigation. The police eventually moved on to the next violent city crime. We leave the heavy traffic of Manila and travel west. We are moving from a king of ice cream to a prophet. The air is dry, and the sun is hot in Africa. A fortified compound sits in the middle of a busy city. Inside, a group of followers is chanting a holy name. We leave the busy streets of Manila, where a king of sugar and ice was taken down. Now we travel thousands of miles west to the high plateau of Ethiopia. We find ourselves in the capital city of Addis Ababa, under a burning sun. The air here is dry and filled with the scent of spices and wood smoke. We are moving from a man who sold cold treats to a man who sold eternal hope. He was not a king of industry, but a king of the spirit. He was known to thousands of his followers as the Great Prophet. A fortified compound sits in the middle of a very busy city district. High stone walls topped with sharp wire surround the large and expensive main house. Inside the courtyard, a group of hundreds of followers is chanting a holy name. They sway back and forth in the heat while waiting for a single touch. They believe that this man has the power to heal any sickness in the world, but inside the inner sanctum of the house, the chanting suddenly stops. A scream rings out from behind the heavy oak doors of the prophet's room. The prophet was found dead in his inner sanctum on a bed of silk. His name was Kase Tekel, and he was a very powerful religious leader. He lived a life of extreme luxury while his followers gave him their last coins. He claimed that he could cure the most deadly diseases with a simple prayer. But the prophet could not save himself from a very sharp and cold blade. He had multiple stab wounds that looked like they were part of a ritual. How did an assassin get through the prophet's private army? The story goes back to early June of 2007 in Ethiopia. Kase Tekli had started his small religious sect with only a few people. But he was a very charismatic man who knew how to talk to the poor. He told them that their suffering was a test of their faith in him. He promised them that he was the only gateway to a better life. Within a few short years, he had amassed a massive following across the region. He became one of the wealthiest men in the whole country. Kase claimed he could cure a very deadly virus through spiritual intervention. Thousands of people who were sick traveled for miles to reach his compound gates. They stood in long lines for days just to catch a glimpse of him. He would charge them large sums of money for a secret and holy oil. He told them that medicine was a sign of weakness and lack of trust. Many people stopped their actual medical treatments to follow his strange and dark rules. He held a total and terrifying power over their lives. The prophet lived like a modern emperor inside his massive and guarded estate. He had a private security force that patrolled the walls 24 hours a day. They carried heavy weapons and were loyal only to the man himself. He rarely left the compound and only spoke to a small inner circle. These were his most trusted advisors, who managed his vast and growing fortune. They lived in the same luxury and shared in the profits of his church. The world outside the walls did not exist for them. The day of the murder was like any other hot day in June. The gates were closed, and the guards were at their usual high posts. Kase had retired to his private room for a long afternoon of prayer. He told his guards that he was not to be disturbed for any reason. The inner circle waited in the hallway, just outside of his heavy door. Everything seemed perfectly normal until a loud thud was heard from the room. Then the silence was broken by a long and very sharp cry. The guards rushed into the room and found a very gruesome scene. Kase Tekel was lying on the floor in a pool of dark blood. There were candles arranged in a perfect circle around his cold body. He had been stabbed over 20 times with a very thin and sharp knife. The windows were all locked from the inside with heavy iron bars. There was no signs of a struggle or any forced entry at all. The prophet had been killed in a room that was totally sealed. The local police arrived and faced a wall of silence from the followers. The people outside the walls refused to believe that their prophet was dead. They believed that he was simply in a deep and holy trance. The officers had to use force just to enter the main house for clues. They found that the inner circle was acting very strange and very calm. No one seemed to be mourning the loss of their great spiritual leader. They were more worried about the heavy bags of cash in the office. The detectives realized that the killer must have been someone the prophet trusted. No stranger could have passed through the 3 layers of armed security. There were no strange footprints or any DNA that did not belong there. The police began to interview the members of the inner circle one by one. They found that everyone had a perfect alibi for the time of the death, but they also found that everyone was lying about the money. A massive amount of gold was missing from the vault. The investigation hit a wall until they found a hidden trapdoor. It was located under a heavy rug in the prophet's private prayer room. The door led to a small tunnel that went beneath the stone walls. In that tunnel, the police found a secret and very detailed ledger. It contained the names of everyone who had paid for a miracle. It also showed that the inner circle had been stealing from Kase. They had been funneling millions of dollars into private bank accounts for years. The critical turning point came when they found the thin and sharp knife. It was hidden inside a hollowed-out holy book in the main office. The blood on the blade was a perfect match for the dead prophet. The police also found a pair of bloody gloves in the same secret spot. The fingerprints on the gloves belonged to the prophet's most loyal and trusted advisor. He was the man who had been by his side since the very beginning. The betrayal was complete, and it was very personal. Now let us pause for a moment and really think about this. I want you to consider a very dark and haunting question. What if the person you trusted with your very soul was a fraud? Imagine that the holy hands you reached for were only after your wallet. You give them everything you have because you want to be saved from pain. Then you find out they were laughing at you the entire time. I do not know about you, but that fact sends chills down my spine. The police were able to piece together the reenactment of the crime. The inner circle had realized that the prophet was becoming too paranoid. He had started to ask questions about the missing gold and the accounts. They knew that if he found the truth, he would have them killed. They decided that the prophet had to go before he could act against them. They used the secret tunnel to enter his room while he was praying. They arranged the candles to make it look like a ritual. They wanted the followers to think that it was a spiritual event. They hoped that the police would be too afraid to investigate a holy man, but their own greed had left a very clear and obvious paper trail. They had killed the man who made them rich, just to get even more. The advisor had done the actual stabbing while the others stood watch. They had worked together to clean the room and hide the thin weapon. They thought they were smarter than the local law. The conclusion of the case was a massive scandal for the whole country. The prophet was revealed to be a man who exploited the very sick. He had never cured anyone and had only built a kingdom of lies. His inner circle was composed of common thieves and cold-blooded killers. The followers were left with nothing but their broken hearts and empty pockets. The wealth that was promised to heaven was actually hidden in the ground. The great prophet was just a man in silk. Several high-ranking members of the sect were arrested for the murder. They were charged with conspiracy and the theft of religious funds. The main advisor was sentenced to life in a very hard labor prison. He sat in the court and refused to look at the people he robbed. The other members of the circle received long terms for their roles. The trial was shrouded in secrecy because of the religious fervor involved, but the truth could not be kept in the dark forever. The aftermath of the case led to the dissolution of the entire sect. It broke apart into several smaller and often violent splinter groups. Each group claimed to have the real secrets of the dead prophet. The compound in Addis Ababa was eventually seized by the local government. It stands as a silent reminder of how easily faith can be twisted. The walls that were meant to keep the world out are now crumbling. The story of Kase Tekla is a dark lesson for everyone. A golden crucifix was found lying in the dirt near the tunnel exit. It was a heavy and expensive piece that the prophet always wore. It was the last thing he had in his hand when he died that day. The police kept it in an evidence locker for a long time. We leave the dry air of Ethiopia and travel across the sea. We are moving from a spiritual altar to a small kitchen stove. The air is thick with the smell of frying meat. The golden crucifix of the prophet was a heavy weight in the hand. We move away from that spiritual altar and toward a very different flame. This flame is burning on a small stove in a cramped kitchen. We are in the Guerrero district of Mexico City. It is a place of narrow streets and crowded apartment blocks. The air is thick with the heavy scent of cooking meat. A pan is sizzling over a steady blue flame on the stove. It sounds like a normal dinner is being prepared for a guest. But there is a very dark secret in this room. Police officers stood at the door of the apartment and hesitated. They could smell something frying as they pushed the door open wide. The air was warm and greasy from the steam of the kitchen. One officer looked into the pan and saw pieces of meat cooking. He thought he was looking at a regular meal of seasoned pork, but he soon realized the shape of the meat was very wrong. He dropped his flashlight when he saw the truth of the situation. This was the house of a real and living monster. The story goes back to October of 2007. José Luis Calva Zepeda was a man who lived a double life. To his neighbors, he was a struggling writer of dark horror tales. He was often seen at the local cafe with a notebook. He would spend hours writing about vampires and cold-blooded killers. People thought he just had a very vivid and dark imagination. He seemed like a quiet man who kept mostly to himself. No one knew he was living out his own horrific stories. José had a reputation for being a very intense and poetic soul. He often talked about his desire for fame and artistic greatness. He told his friends that he was writing a masterpiece of horror. He said that his work would change the way people viewed death. His apartment was cluttered with stacks of paper and old books. There were posters of classic horror movies pinned to the peeling walls. He seemed like a man who was dedicated to his craft. He was a master of using words to hide his actions. The trigger for the investigation was a woman named Alejandra Galeana. She was the girlfriend of the writer, and she was very young. One day in October, she failed to return home to her mother. Her family knew that she had gone to visit José that day. They tried to call her phone, but it went straight to mail. They went to his apartment and knocked, but no one answered. The mother felt a deep sense of dread in her chest. She knew that something was very wrong with her daughter. The mother did not wait for the police to act on their own. She went to the station and demanded that they check the apartment. She told the officers about the strange behavior of the writer lately. The police agreed to conduct a welfare check at the residence. They arrived at the building and climbed the narrow stairs to the room. They could hear the sound of the pan sizzling from the hallway. They pounded on the door and announced their presence to the person. There was a sudden sound of movement from inside. The officers forced the door open and were hit by the smell. It was a mixture of cheap perfume and burning animal fat. They saw José standing near the stove with a blank expression. He looked at the officers as if they were uninvited guests. One officer moved toward the kitchen and looked into the frying pan. He saw pieces of flesh that were clearly not from a pig. He realized that the writer was in the middle of a meal. The room became very silent as the horror began to sink in. The detectives began a thorough search of the small and dark apartment. They opened a large closet in the bedroom and found Alejandra. Her remains had been carefully hidden behind a row of heavy coats. She had been dismembered with a level of surgical and cold precision. The officers found more pieces of her body in the cereal boxes. They even found parts of her inside of the small refrigerator. The writer had treated her like a source of food and art. It was a scene that defied any human logic. The investigation into the writer soon expanded far beyond that one room. The police began to look at unsolved missing persons cases in the city. They found that several other women had disappeared near his home. One of them was a former girlfriend who vanished 2 years earlier. Another was a local street vendor who was last seen with him. The detectives realized that José was not a first-time killer. He had been perfecting his dark and macabre craft for many years. He was a serial killer hiding as a poet. The search of the apartment revealed a mountain of written evidence. The police found hundreds of poems written in a very beautiful script. These poems detailed the act of killing and eating human beings. They were not works of fiction, but were detailed and cold logs. José had written about the taste and texture of his victims. He described the feeling of power he felt while he consumed them. The manuscripts were a window into the mind of a predator. He believed that he was creating a new kind of art. The critical turning point came when they found a specific horror novel. It was a story that José had been working on for months. The plot of the book matched the crime scene perfectly in every way. He had described the exact tools he would use for the job. He had written about the frying pan and the closet in detail. It was clear that he had planned every step of the murder. He was not just a killer, but a director of his tragedy. He was living inside of his own dark chapters. The police were able to piece together the reenactment of the case. Jose had invited Alejandra over for a romantic dinner that night. He had spoken to her about his new book and his dreams. While she was distracted, he had attacked her from the shadows. He used his knowledge of anatomy to perform the dismemberment quickly. He then began to prepare the meal as if it were normal. He wanted to experience the final act of his own horror story. He sat at the table with his notebook ready. Now let us pause for a moment and really look at this. I want you to step into the shoes of those neighbors. You lived right next to this man for many months. You saw him every day, and you probably said hello. You might have even asked him about his writing projects. He was a polite neighbor who always seemed to be very busy. But all that time, he had those things in his kitchen. It makes you realize how little we know about other people. We only see the face they choose to show us. Jose Luis Calva Zepeda did not surrender to the police that day. When the officers moved to arrest him, he ran for the balcony. He climbed over the railing and jumped to the street below. He fell several feet and hit the pavement with a loud thud. He tried to crawl away through the heavy city traffic in pain, but the officers were too fast and they tackled him to ground. He was taken to a local hospital under a very heavy guard. He had several broken bones, but he was still alive. The legal outcome of the case was as strange as the crime. Jose was charged with multiple counts of murder and cannibalism. He became a sensation in the Mexican media during his recovery. People called him the Hannibal Lecter of Chihuahua and the Guerrero district. He seemed to enjoy the attention and the fame he had found. He gave interviews from his hospital bed about his artistic vision. He acted as if he were a misunderstood genius and a star. He had finally found the fame he always wanted. But the writer would never face a jury for his many crimes. Just a few weeks after his arrest, he was found dead. He was in his cell at the high-security prison in Mexico. The official report stated that he had committed suicide with a belt. But there were many rumors that he was killed by other inmates. They did not want a monster like him in their own facility. He died before he could tell the location of other bodies. He took his dark and bloody secrets to the grave. The aftermath of the case left a lingering impact on the city. The apartment building where he lived became a place of dark tourism. People would stand in the street and look up at the balcony. They wanted to see the place where the horror writer lived. The families of the victims were left without a full trial. They never received a public apology or a full legal closure. The name of Jose Luis Calva Zepeda remains a dark shadow. He is a reminder that monsters can write beautiful poems. A horror novel manuscript was found lying on the kitchen table. It was covered in grease and small stains from the frying pan. The police took it into evidence as a record of his mind. But no one ever published the book for the public to read. It remains locked away in a cold and dark police file room. We leave the urban sprawl of Mexico City and travel south. We are moving from the city streets to the dense mangroves. The air is humid and smells like salt and wet earth. The camera moves away from the frying pans of Mexico City. It travels south over the ocean toward the coast of Panama. We are looking at a place called Bocas del Toro. It is a beautiful string of islands with white sand. A luxury boat is bobbing gently in the tropical paradise. The water is a bright blue and the sun is warm. But near the shore, the trees become very thick. These are the mangroves with tangled roots and dark mud. They look like a wall that guards a secret. The air here is humid and heavy with salt. A dog was digging in the dirt of a tropical garden. This was on a remote property near the thick mangroves. The owner of the dog watched as the animal became excited. It was pulling at something buried just beneath the dark surface. The owner walked over to see what the dog found. He expected to find a bone from a local animal, but as the dirt moved away, he saw a human foot. It was pale and partially preserved by the wet island mud. He realized he was looking at a very shallow grave. The man stood frozen as the dog continued to scratch away. He looked around the quiet property and felt a deep fear. This was supposed to be a safe haven for wealthy expats. Why was there a body buried behind this beautiful luxury home? He called the local police to report the grim discovery. Investigators arrived and began to dig into the soft earth. They soon found that this was not just one body. They were standing on top of a graveyard in paradise. Someone was hiding a very large number of secrets here. Why are wealthy people vanishing from this tropical island paradise? This was the question that started to haunt the local community. For years, people from America had moved here for peace. They bought large homes and lived a very quiet life. But lately, several of these people had stopped showing up. Their houses were sold to new owners very quickly and quietly. Friends and family members back home were starting to ask questions. They wanted to know where their loved ones had gone. The answers were waiting in the dark mangroves. The story goes back to November of 2007. Bocas del Toro was seen as a dream destination for many. People felt safe and free in the warm tropical air. It was a place where you could truly disappear if wanted. But a different kind of disappearance was happening in the shadows. A man named William Holbert had arrived on the island recently. Everyone knew him by his nickname, which was Wild Bill. He was a very large man with many colorful tattoos. He seemed like a friendly guy. William was the life of every single party on the island. He hosted big dinners and told many amazing stories of adventure. He claimed to be a successful businessman looking for new deals. He spent his money freely and bought people many expensive drinks. People liked him because he was always smiling and very loud. He seemed to fit right into the relaxed expat culture. He told everyone that he wanted to buy local property and stay. He was looking for the perfect place to settle down forever. William soon became a very popular figure in the local social scene. He was always seen with his wife at the local bars. They seemed like a very happy and very wealthy young couple. They talked about their big plans for a new luxury resort. William was especially interested in meeting other expats who lived alone. He asked them many questions about their homes and their finances. He wanted to know who had family nearby and who did not. He was looking for people who would not be missed quickly. Cheryl Lynn Hughes was a local favorite in the expat community. She was a very kind woman who owned a small hotel. Cheryl had lived on the island for many years and loved it. She was known for her bright smile and her adventurous spirit. One day, in late 2007, her house went quiet. Her friends noticed that her boat was still at the dock, but Cheryl was nowhere to be found on the entire island. She had missed several scheduled lunch meetings with her close friends. The friends of Cheryl went to her house to check. They found that her passport was still sitting on the table. This was very strange because Cheryl loved to travel often. Her dogs had not been fed and were very hungry. They contacted the local police to file a missing person report. The officers went to talk to the newest owner of her property. They were surprised to find William Holbert living in her house. He met them at the door with a cold and steady stare. William told the police that he had bought the house recently. He claimed that Cheryl had decided to move back to America. He showed them a property deed that appeared to be legal. It had her signature at the bottom of the page. He said she had left in a hurry to visit family. The police were suspicious, but they had no proof of any crime. They left the property, but they kept a close watch. They began to look into the history of William Holbert's other deals. The investigation moved to the remote mangroves on the large property. Police officers spent several days searching through the thick, tangled roots. They had to deal with the heat and the many insects. The mud was deep, and it smelled like rotting plant matter. They used long metal poles to probe the ground for soft spots. One officer felt the pole hit something solid in the muck. They began to dig and found the first shallow grave there. It contained the remains of the missing woman. The identification of Cheryl Lynn Hughes sent a shock through the community. People could not believe that their friend was dead in mud. The police continued to dig in the same area for hours. They found more bodies buried in the dark and wet earth. Every victim was an expat who had disappeared over the last year. They had all been neighbors and friends of the large man. The detectives realized they were dealing with a serial killer in paradise. They needed to find William before he could kill again. The critical turning point came when they searched the main house. William had already fled the island by the time they arrived. He had taken his wife and his expensive boat into night. The police found a small black wallet hidden in a drawer. Inside were the credit cards of all the missing people. They also found several forged property deeds for luxury island homes. Every deed had a signature that looked like it was faked. William had been stealing the lives of his victims for profit. The reenactment of the crimes revealed a very cold and calculated plan. William would target people who lived alone on remote island properties. He would spend weeks befriending them and gaining their total trust. He would bring them gifts and offer to help with chores. Once he knew they were alone, he would invite them over. He would offer them a drink and sit behind them. Then he would shoot them in the back of the head. He did not want a struggle or a mess. After the murder, he would move the body to the mangroves. He used the soft mud to hide the evidence of his work. Then he would sit at their desk and forge their names. He would take over their houses and their bank accounts. He told the neighbors that the owners had simply moved away. He would then sell the stolen property to get quick cash. He lived in luxury while his friends were buried in dirt. He was a predator who used paradise as his hunting ground. Now I want you to think about the deep irony here. Bill moved to this place to find a perfect paradise. He wanted to live the dream life under the warm sun. But he ended up creating a private hell in the mud. I do not know about you, but that is haunting. He killed the very people who welcomed him into the town. He used their kindness as a way to find their secrets. The place they loved became the place where they died forever. It is truly chilling. The search for William Holbert spanned across several different countries. He led the police on a chase through Central America. He was finally captured by the military in the country of Nicaragua. He was trying to cross the border with a large amount of cash. He did not fight back when the soldiers surrounded his boat. He was extradited back to Panama to face the local legal system. He arrived at the airport in heavy chains and an orange suit. He was no longer smiling. William eventually confessed to 5 murders on the tropical islands. He spoke about the killings with a total lack of any remorse. He said he did it because he wanted to be rich. He described the process of forging the documents in great detail. The court sentenced him to 47 years in a prison. His wife was also convicted for her role in the crimes. They will spend the rest of their lives in a cell. The luxury homes they stole were returned to the families. The aftermath of the case changed the expat community forever. People who moved there for peace now lived in deep fear. They started to look at new neighbors with a sense of suspicion. They installed heavy gates and cameras on their remote island properties. The story of Wild Bill became a dark legend in Panama. It is a reminder that monsters can hide in beautiful places. The mangroves still grow over the spots where the graves were found. The silence of the island has a new meaning. A forged property deed was the final image for the detectives. It was a piece of paper that represented a stolen life. The signature was a cold lie that led to a grave. The police eventually finished their work, and the islands grew quiet. We leave the tropical air of Panama and travel west. We are moving from the mangroves to a quiet jungle island. The air is warm, but the history of the place is dark. A neon sign flickers over the entrance of a club. The camera pulls away from the dark and muddy mangroves of Panama and flies west. It crosses the vast and empty stretches of the deep Pacific Ocean toward Saipan. We are heading to a small island of white sand and green jungles. The air is warm and smells like salt and tropical flowers. A neon sign for the KJ nightclub flickers in the dark night. Local people go there to dance and forget their troubles for a while. One man is walking toward the entrance with a very dark purpose tonight. The heavy door of the nightclub swings open, and a man walks inside the room. He does not look like a stranger or a threat to anyone there. He is a local resident who has lived on the island his whole life. The music is loud and the dance floor is crowded with happy people. He reaches into his heavy jacket and pulls out a large black handgun. Without saying a word, he begins to fire into the middle of the crowd. The music stops as the first screams ring out in the dark club. The shooter moves with a cold and steady hand across the crowded dance floor. He does not target anyone in particular as he pulls the heavy trigger repeatedly. People scramble to find cover behind the bar and under the small wooden tables. The sound of breaking glass and falling chairs fills the humid night air. In just a few minutes, the nightclub has turned into a scene of terror. 4 people lie still on the floor while many others are badly wounded. The man turns and walks back out into the night silence. Why would a local resident target his own small community so violently and suddenly? This was the question that left the entire island of Saipan in deep shock. This was a place where people left their front doors unlocked at night. Everyone knew their neighbors, and families had lived there for many long generations. Mass violence was something that happened in big cities, on the mainland far away. It was not something that was supposed to happen in a tropical island paradise. The police arrived to find a nightmare they never expected to see. The story goes back to November 19th, in the year 2007. Saipan is a small and beautiful territory located in the northern Mariana Islands. It is an island with a very long and very complex military history. You can still see rusted tanks from the Second World War on the beaches. The jungle is filled with old concrete bunkers and hidden paths from the past. Life on the island usually moves at a very slow and peaceful pace. Most people spend their days fishing or working in small local shops. The shooter was a man who lived a very quiet and isolated life lately. He had a history of domestic disputes that local police knew about well. His neighbors said he had become increasingly angry and distant in recent weeks. He felt like the small island was closing in on him every day. He spent a lot of time alone in the deep jungle near his house. No one knew that he was collecting firearms and planning a final act. He wanted to make sure that the island would never forget his name. The nightclub was the center of social life for many young people in Saipan. On that Monday night, the atmosphere was light and everyone was having a good time. There were tourists from Asia and local families, enjoying the warm tropical breeze together. The drinks were cold, and the music was a mix of local hits. No one noticed the man standing in the shadows of the parking lot first. He waited for the club to be at its busiest before moving. He wanted the largest crowd possible for his dark plan. The scene inside the club after the shooting was one of absolute chaos. People were crying out for their friends and family members in the dark. The smell of gunpowder and blood hung heavy in the warm night air. First responders arrived quickly, but they were overwhelmed by the number of victims there. They had never handled a mass casualty event of this size before today. Every available ambulance on the island was called to the scene at once. The police realized the shooter was still out there somewhere. A massive manhunt began across the entire island of Saipan just after midnight. The police called in the military to help search the dense jungle paths. They knew the shooter was armed and extremely dangerous to the public now. They warned everyone to stay inside and lock their doors and windows tight. The search teams moved through the thick vines and sharp tropical grass slowly. They used powerful flashlights and heat cameras to look for any human movement. The island felt very small as they closed off the main roads. The shooter had fled into the dark interior of the island on foot. He knew the jungle better than most of the officers who were chasing. He used the old paths that were built during the Second World War. These trails were overgrown and very difficult to navigate in the pitch black. He was moving toward a place that offered him a final refuge. It was a concrete bunker built by soldiers over 60 years ago. He had spent time there as a young boy playing in the ruins. The critical turning point came when an officer found a white car nearby. It was parked on a dirt track that led deep into the woods. The engine was still warm, and the driver's side door was open. The police realized the shooter had abandoned his vehicle to move into cover. They called for more backup to surround the area near the old bunker. They could hear the sound of the ocean waves hitting the cliffs nearby. The tension was at a breaking point as the sun began to rise. The police used a megaphone to call out the name of the man. They told him to throw his weapon down and come out slowly. There was no response from the dark opening of the concrete bunker at all. They sent a small robot with a camera inside to see the interior. The video feed showed a small room filled with trash and old metal. At the back of the bunker, they saw a man sitting down. He was leaning against the wall with his handgun in his lap. He did not move as the robot approached him. The officers entered the bunker with their shields raised and weapons ready to fire. They found the shooter was dead from a single self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had decided to end his own life before they could capture. The manhunt was finally over, but the tragedy was just beginning for Saipan. They found a small bag of extra ammunition and a short note. The note spoke about his anger toward the world and his family. He wanted to go out in a way that people remembered. The conclusion of the case brought a very heavy sadness to the island. 4 innocent people had lost their lives for no reason at all. They were young people with bright futures and families who loved them. The shooter had taken his own secrets to the grave in the bunker. The island community came together to hold a massive candlelight vigil soon. They prayed for the victims and for the healing of their home. It was the darkest day in the modern history of the territory. The silence was heavy. Now I want you to really think about this for a moment. We often think of remote islands as places to hide from the world. We see them as paradises where the problems of society cannot reach us. But the human heart carries its own darkness, no matter the location. A man lived in a place of beauty, but saw only shadows. He chose to destroy his own neighbors in a place of joy. I do not know about you, but that is very haunting. Location does not change who a person really is. The legal outcome of the case was a formal closure by the police. Since the shooter was dead, there could be no criminal trial later. The families of the victims struggled to find any sense of justice. They were left with many questions that would never be answered by anyone. The island government held several public meetings to discuss the tragedy in detail. They wanted to understand how such a violent event could happen there. They promised to do everything possible to prevent it from ever repeating. The aftermath of the case led to significant changes in local laws. Saipan implemented much stricter regulations for the purchase of all-powerful firearms. They also increased the funding for local mental health services across the island. The KJ nightclub remained closed for a long time out of respect. When it finally reopened, it was a much more quiet and somber place. The memory of that night in November is still very fresh today. People still talk about the 4 lives that were taken away. A spent shell casing was found on the floor of the bunker. It was the final piece of evidence in a very dark night. The police collected it and marked it as item number 100. The bunker was eventually sealed off with heavy metal bars by the city. It remains a dark landmark in the middle of the green jungle. We leave the warm air of Saipan and travel back east. We are moving from a jungle bunker to a rainy park. The air is cold and smells like wet pavement. The camera travels across the Pacific and toward the city of Liverpool. We see an 11-year-old boy walking home from practice. He is wearing a bright blue football kit and carrying a ball. He is walking through a car park near a local pub today. He does not know that 2 gangs are about to meet here. He is just thinking about the game he played with his friends. The rain is starting to fall on the gray streets of the city. A teenager on a bicycle is waiting in the dark shadows. The camera leaves the dark and humid island of Saipan. It travels thousands of miles over the ocean and lands in England. We find ourselves in the city of Liverpool on a gray day. The air is cool and smells like damp pavement and old brick. This is a city with a very long and rich history. But there is a war happening on these wet streets today. It is a war fought between young men over very small lines. We see a boy walking toward a car park near a pub. He is just trying to get home to his family. An 11-year-old boy lies on the cold ground of a parking lot. 3 shots have just echoed through the evening air of the city. One of those bullets has hit the boy directly in the back. His mother is screaming for help as she kneels in the wet dirt. She was waiting for him just a few hundred feet away today. The shooter is already pedaling away on a mountain bike into the dark. He disappears behind a row of gray houses in the council estate. People are looking out of their windows, but no one says a word. How can a whole neighborhood know the killer but refuse to speak? This question would haunt the detectives for many months of the long year. An innocent child has been caught in the middle of a war. He had nothing to do with the gangs or the local drugs. He was just a boy who loved to play football with friends. Now, his name is on every television screen across the entire country. The police are facing a wall of silence that seems impossible to break. They know that the killer is hiding in a house nearby. The story goes back to August 22nd in 2007. Liverpool was a city divided by a very violent and senseless gang war. 2 groups were fighting for control over a few blocks of street. They were known as the Croxteth Crew and the Norris Green Gang. These teenagers used guns to settle their petty disputes over territory and pride. They called it a postcode war because they fought over their zip codes. Most of the residents lived in fear of these young men on bikes. Rhys Jones was an 11-year-old boy who lived for football. He was a dedicated fan of the Everton team and wore their colors. On this Wednesday, he was at practice with his local youth team. He spent the afternoon running across the green grass with his many friends. He was happy because he had just scored a goal during the game. When practice ended, he began the short walk back to his own home. He had to cross a parking lot near the Fir Tree pub. The walk home was something Rhys did every single week after the practice. He knew the paths and the streets of his neighborhood very well. He felt safe in the place where he had grown up with friends. His mother was waiting for him just a little further down the road. It was a normal evening in a normal part of the large city. But a 16-year-old boy named Sean Mercer was also nearby. He was a member of the Croxteth crew, and he had a gun. Sean Mercer had received a phone call about a rival gang member. He was told that a member of the Norris Green gang was nearby. He climbed onto his mountain bike and pulled up his black hoodie. He carried a heavy Smith & Wesson revolver hidden in his jacket pocket. He did not care about the people walking in the public car park. He only cared about proving his loyalty to his local street gang. He pedaled toward the Fir Tree pub with a dark and violent intent. Sean arrived at the edge of the parking lot and saw his target. He did not hesitate to pull the heavy silver weapon from his coat. He stood on the pedals of his bike to steady his aim. He fired 3 shots toward a group of teenagers across the lot. He was not a trained shooter, and the gun kicked back hard. The first 2 shots missed the rival gang members and hit a wall, but the third bullet traveled across the lot and hit young Rhys Jones. The boy in the blue football kit collapsed onto the cold pavement instantly. He did not even see the person who had fired the shots. His mother heard the bangs and ran toward the sound in a panic. She found her son lying still and began to scream for help. Neighbors came running out of the pub to see what had happened there. They tried to help the boy, but the injury was too severe. The shooter was already gone into the maze of the council houses. The crime scene at the Fir Tree pub was a sea of blue. Police officers and forensic experts worked under the bright yellow floodlights all night. They found the spent shell casings lying in the wet dirt and glass. They looked for any DNA or fingerprints left behind by the mountain bike, but the neighborhood was silent as the officers knocked on every door. People were terrified of what the gangs would do if they spoke out. They chose to look at the floor instead of the police. The investigation into the murder of Rhys Jones was a massive police operation. Detectives knew they were looking for a young man on a mountain bike. They also knew that the weapon was a very old revolver. They began to monitor the phone calls of every known gang member. They followed the teenagers through the streets and watched their every move carefully. But the wall of silence was holding strong in the local council estate. No one wanted to be the first person to tell the truth. The critical turning point came from a secret recording inside a house. The police had hidden a bugging device in a suspect's living room. They listened to hours of boring conversation and loud music for weeks. Then they heard several teenagers talking about the night of the shooting. They heard a voice describing how the gun had been hidden away. They also heard the name of the boy who had pulled the trigger. The detectives realized that they finally had the evidence they needed for arrest. Now let us pause for a moment and really look at this. I want you to think about the breaking point for a city. A child died because of a zip code on a map today. He was killed by a boy who was not even an adult. I do not know about you, but that fact is truly haunting. We build these systems of loyalty that destroy the most innocent people. A football kit became a target in a war that made no sense. It makes you wonder how we let things get this bad. The police used the secret recordings to identify the teenage gun runner. They found the boy who had been told to hide the revolver. He was only 17 years old, and he was terrified of the gang. He finally broke the silence and told the officers where it was. The gun was found hidden inside of a plastic bag in his attic. It was covered in the DNA of Sean Mercer and the victim's blood. The forensic evidence was now a perfect match for the crime. The detectives were able to piece together the reenactment of the case. Sean Mercer had been told to find a rival near the pub. He had fired the gun with no regard for the many people. After the shooting, he had fled to a friend's house nearby. He had washed his hands with gasoline to remove any gunpowder residue. He had then ordered the younger boy to take the gun and hide it. He believed that he was safe because of the local fear. The conclusion of the case brought the gang members to a high court. Sean Mercer was charged with the murder of an innocent 11-year-old. Several other teenagers were charged with helping him hide the evidence after. The trial lasted for 9 weeks and gripped the entire British nation. The jury watched the security footage of the boy on the bicycle. They heard the tapes of the gang members laughing about the shooting later. The truth was finally out in the open for everyone to see. The legal outcome was a long sentence for the members of the gang. Sean Mercer was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison. He must serve at least 22 years before he can apply. The other teenagers involved also received long terms for their roles in crime. The judge spoke about the total lack of human mercy in their acts. He said they had brought a dark shadow over the entire city. The family of Rhys Jones finally had a bit of justice. The aftermath of the case led to a major national outcry in UK. The government implemented new laws to target the gang culture in cities. They created special units to deal with the postcode wars and the guns. The murder of Rhys Jones became a symbol of the cost of violence. A memorial was built near the car park where the boy fell. It is a place of peace in a neighborhood that was once war. People still leave flowers and football scarves at the site today. A hoodie-clad teenager on a bicycle was the final image for police. It was a common sight that turned into a nightmare for a family. The detectives eventually finished their work and the city tried to heal. We leave the cold and rainy streets of Liverpool and travel south. We are moving from local gang wars to a very high-level hit. The air is dry, and the smell of expensive tea is strong. A man is sitting in a London hotel with a guest. The teenager on the bicycle in Liverpool was fighting for a small street corner. He used a heavy metal gun and a hooded sweatshirt to hide his face. But in the city of London, a different kind of killer was moving. This man did not wear a hoodie or ride a bike through the rain. He wore an expensive suit and sat in the lobby of a fine hotel. He did not use a lead bullet to take a life that day. He used something that the human eye could never see. This was a war between nations. A fine porcelain teacup sat on a low wooden table in the London hotel. The steam rose in thin white curls into the quiet air of the bar. It looked like a normal meeting between old friends in a very high-end place. A man named Alexander Litvinenko picked up the cup and took a single small sip. He did not notice any strange taste or any unusual smell in the liquid. He put the cup back down and continued his conversation with the two guests. He had no idea he was now a walking weapon. Alexander Litvinenko was a man who knew a great deal about the dark world of secrets. He was a former officer for the Russian security services who had fled to London. He had spent years exposing the deep corruption within the government of his home country. In late 2006, he became very ill after a meeting at the hotel. His hair fell out in large clumps, and his skin turned a deep yellow. Doctors at the hospital were completely baffled by his sudden and violent decline. How do you investigate a murder when the weapon is a single invisible atom? This was the question that faced the British police as they looked into the case. Alexander died just 3 weeks after he took that single sip of tea in London. But before he passed away, he told the detectives exactly who he had met. The investigation in 2007 focused on finding the source of his illness. They brought in nuclear experts with special tools to search for the hidden killer. The story reached a boiling point in May of 2007 for everyone. This was the year that the formal criminal investigation finally named a prime suspect. British prosecutors officially accused an ex-security agent named Andrei Lugovoy of the murder. They claimed he had traveled from Moscow to London with a specific and deadly mission. He was not acting alone according to the official reports from the British government. He was part of a very large and high-level operation. Alexander Litvinenko had been living as a refugee in the city of London for years. He felt safe in the crowded streets and the busy parks of his new home. He worked as a consultant and wrote books about the many secrets he knew. His family lived in a quiet neighborhood, and he enjoyed his daily routines there. He believed that the reach of his old enemies could not cross the ocean. But the world of international espionage has a very long and cold memory. The meeting took place at the Millennium Hotel in the heart of the city. Alexander arrived at the Pine Bar to meet with Andrei Lugovoy and another man. They sat in a corner booth and ordered a large pot of green tea. The conversation was polite and focused on potential business deals in the future. Lugovoy and his partner seemed very relaxed as they spoke with their old friend. They offered him the tea and watched as he drank from the small cup. The investigation into the death of Alexander Litvinenko was like no other in history. Detectives did not look for fingerprints or shell casings in the hotel bar that day. They carried Geiger counters that clicked rapidly as they moved through the carpeted hallways. They found that the teapot was emitting a massive amount of deadly radiation. The substance was identified as polonium-210 by the nuclear scientists. It was a very rare and highly radioactive material. The investigators began to trace the trail of the radiation across the entire city. They found that the poison had left a glowing path everywhere the suspects went. Every hotel room where Andrei Lugovoy stayed was contaminated with the radioactive dust. The sink in the bathroom showed a very high reading on the detectors. This suggested that the killers had poured the excess poison down the drain. The invisible trail was leading the police straight to the two men. The trail did not stop at the doors of the expensive London hotels. Nuclear experts were called to search several British Airways planes at the local airport. They found that the seats used by Lugovoy and his partner were also radioactive. Even the tray tables and the overhead bins showed signs of the deadly polonium. The men had been carrying the poison in their luggage and on their clothes. They were leaving a nuclear signature across the globe as they traveled back. Andrei Lugovoy was a man with a very specific set of high-level skills. He had served in the same security circles as Alexander many years before. After the murder, he returned to Moscow and denied all of the British accusations. He claimed that he was being framed by the Western intelligence agencies for politics. He appeared on television and acted as if he were a victim of a conspiracy. But the scientific evidence against him was growing stronger every single day. In May of 2007, the British government made a bold move. They officially requested the extradition of Andrei Lugovoy from his home in Russia. They wanted him to stand trial in a London court for the murder. This request triggered a massive diplomatic freeze between the two powerful nations. It was a level of tension that had not been seen since the Cold War. The world watched as the two governments traded angry words in public. The critical turning point came when the Russian government refused to send the suspect. They claimed that their constitution prevented the extradition of any citizen to a foreign land. This refusal was seen as a sign of protection for the alleged killers. The British government responded by expelling several diplomats from the City of London. The case was no longer just a murder investigation in a small hotel bar. It had become a major international crisis between world powers. The reenactment of the crime was a chilling look at a very professional hit. The killers had traveled to London with a small vial of the radioactive liquid. They had met with Alexander several times to find the perfect moment to strike. While he was distracted, they had slipped the polonium into the pot of tea. They knew that a single drop was enough to end a human life. They watched him drink the poison while they sat just inches away. They were not worried about the radiation because they thought they were careful. They believed that the polonium would be impossible for the local doctors to find. They expected Alexander to die of natural causes in a few short weeks. But they did not realize that the scientists would use nuclear tools for clues. Their invisible weapon had left a very bright and obvious trail for everyone. The killers had walked through London like glowing ghosts in the dark night. The conclusion of the investigation was a grim look at state-sponsored violence. The British authorities believed that the hit had been authorized at a high level. Polonium-210 is very difficult to obtain without a nuclear reactor. It is not something that a common criminal can buy on the street. The use of a nuclear signature was meant to be a warning to others. It was a message that the reach of the state was absolute. Now let us pause for a moment and really think about this. I want you to consider the sheer horror of this invisible hit. Imagine that you are sitting in a warm hotel having a cup of tea. You feel safe because you are in a public place with many people. You do not know that the very liquid you are drinking is a weapon. You cannot see it or smell it or even taste it at all. I do not know about you, but that fact is terrifying. The legal outcome was a complete standstill between the two governments for many years. Andrei Lugovoy remained in Russia and even became a member of the parliament. He was given a high level of protection and never faced a judge in London. The British police kept the file open, but they had no way to arrest. The case remained a symbol of the lethal risks of speaking against power. The truth was known, but justice was held behind a wall. The aftermath of the case changed the way the world views political assassinations. It showed that the battlefield of the Cold War had moved to the streets. The city of London became a place of high tension for many Russian exiles. People started to watch their tea and their neighbors with a new suspicion. The name of Alexander Litvinenko became a rallying cry for the freedom of the press. His death was a nuclear event that changed history forever. A Geiger counter clicking rapidly in a bathroom was the final image of the hit. It was the sound of a hidden monster that could not be caught. The investigators eventually finished their reports, and the hotel room was cleaned. We leave the gray streets of London and travel east toward the city of Moscow. We are moving from the Pine Bar to a dark elevator shaft. The air is cold, and the shadows are very long in the high-rise. The camera travels across the continent and lands in the capital of Russia. We see a woman walking toward her apartment building after a long day of work. She is carrying a heavy bag of groceries and a notepad for her stories. She is a journalist who has spent her life telling the truth about war. She does not know that a hit squad has been following her. They are waiting for the doors of the elevator to open tonight. We leave the quiet tea rooms of London behind us now. The camera travels over the snowy plains of Eastern Europe. It lands in the heart of the Russian capital of Moscow. The air here is biting cold and smells like iron. We are moving from a hotel bar to a dark hallway. This is a place of massive concrete high-rise buildings. Shadows stretch long across the frozen ground in the late evening. We are following a woman as she enters her lobby. She is carrying a bag of groceries and a notepad. The heavy steel doors of the elevator slide open with a groan. Anna steps inside and pushes the button for her floor. She is tired from a long day of writing and research. The lift begins to rise slowly through the quiet apartment block. Suddenly, the doors open on a floor that is not hers. A man stands in the dark opening with a leather jacket. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a silver pistol. 2 shots ring out in the small and confined space. Anna falls to the floor as the man vanishes. A famous journalist is found dead in her own apartment building elevator. She was a woman who spent her life speaking for victims. Her pen and a bloody notepad lie on the cold floor. This was not a random act of street violence in Moscow. It was a professional hit carried out with very cold precision. The killer knew her schedule and her exact floor number perfectly. Why were high-ranking police officers involved in a reporter's death? This question would soon shake the entire nation to its core. How do you find the killers when the state protects them? This was the question that investigators faced for a long year. Anna had many enemies in very high places of power. She had exposed the dark secrets of the war in Chechnya. Her words were a threat to those who wanted silence. The police found 10 suspects, but the mastermind remained a shadow. People wondered if the truth would ever be told in court. The investigation of 2007 was about to begin. It would reveal a network of true evil. The story goes back to August of 2007. This was the year that the police finally made arrests. They had been working in secret to find the hit squad. 10 men were taken into custody across the busy city. Some of them were former members of the security services. Others were high-ranking police officers who had worked in Moscow. They were accused of helping the killers track Anna's daily moves. This discovery sent a shock through the local newsrooms and public. Anna Politkovskaya was a mother and a very brave investigative reporter. She worked for a small newspaper that was known for truth. Her office was a place of piles of paper and tea. She spent her days interviewing people who had lost everything. Many of her stories focused on the local corruption and war. She was a woman who did not know how to quit. Her friends often told her to be very careful lately. They knew that her work was making powerful men very angry. The life of a journalist in Moscow was a dangerous path. Anna had survived several threats and even a poisoning attempt before. She lived in a modest apartment building on a busy street. She walked her dog and went to the market alone. She refused to have a private security team follow her around. She believed that her work was her only real protection. But the shadows were closing in on her during the autumn. A group of men was watching her apartment from a distance. The trigger for the arrests happened in late August of that year. Prosecutors announced that they had found a complex murder network today. The team involved Chechen criminals and Russian federal security agents too. This confirmed what many people had feared from the very start. The murder was a coordinated effort by several different dark groups. They had worked together to silence a single and powerful voice. The news of the arrests dominated the headlines for many weeks. The investigation was now moving into the light of day. The crime scene on Lesnaya Street was a very grim sight. Investigators found the body of Anna inside the small elevator car. A handgun had been left near her as a signature. The walls of the lobby were cold and made of stone. There were no cameras to record the faces of the killers. The neighbors reported hearing the shots, but saw almost nothing at all. The hit was carried out during the busy late afternoon. The killers had walked out into the street and simply vanished. The detectives began to piece together the surveillance logs for the hit. They found that Anna had been followed for several long weeks. A car had been parked outside her office every single day. The men inside were using high-tech police equipment to track. They knew exactly when she left her home and returned. They even knew what grocery store she visited on her way. This level of detail required help from the local security services. The investigation was leading to the heart of the government. The arrests of the 10 suspects revealed a very deep rot. One of the men was a former officer for the FSB. This was the most powerful security agency in the entire country. He was accused of providing the address and the daily routine. Another suspect was a high-ranking police major in the city. He had used his power to help the hit squad move. The web of the conspiracy was much larger than expected. It involved men who were supposed to uphold the law. The investigators searched the homes of the arrested men for clues. They found maps of the neighborhood and several burner cell phones. They also discovered records of large payments made in foreign cash. The money had come from a source that remained completely hidden. The hit squad was composed of brothers from the Chechen region. They had been hired to pull the trigger for the boss. But the detectives still lacked the name of the mastermind. The real killer was still hiding in the high offices. The critical turning point came from a witness in the newsroom. A person reported seeing a man in a leather jacket nearby. This man had been asking questions about Anna's travel plans lately. The police used this description to track down the main shooter. They found him hiding in a remote village far from Moscow. He was a professional killer who had done this before today. The evidence against the group was becoming a solid wall. They were finally going to face a judge and jury. Now let's pause for a moment and look at this. I want you to really think about the peer perspective. Look at your own life for just a tiny moment here. We often take our basic safety for granted every single day. We walk into our homes and feel totally secure there. Anna knew that every time she opened her front door, she knew that people were watching her every single move. I want you to really think about that kind of courage. I don't know about you, but that is incredible. The police were able to piece together the final reenactment. The hit squad had been waiting in the lobby since noon. They knew that Anna would be returning with her groceries soon. When she entered the building, the shooter moved into the lift. He fired 2 shots at close range to ensure the job. He then walked out and entered a waiting car nearby. The driver was a former police officer who knew the route. They had planned the escape to avoid all major checkpoints. The conclusion of the case was a mixture of victory and loss. Several men were found guilty of the murder and conspiracy. They were sentenced to long terms in the hardest labor prisons. The shooter received a life term for his role in Hit, but the person who ordered and paid for it was free. The mastermind remained a ghost in the halls of the state. The truth was partially revealed, but justice was not complete. The newspaper office remained empty for a very long time. The legal outcome of the trial was long and messy. Many people believed that the state was protecting the real boss. The evidence against the officers was clear and very strong, though. They had betrayed their badges for a few $1,000s today. The sentences were a sign that some crimes cannot be hidden. But the shadow over the press in Russia grew much darker. Other journalists began to look over their shoulders more often now. The price of the truth had become far too high. The aftermath of the case remains a symbol of great danger. Anna Politkovskaya is remembered as a hero of the free press. Her books are still read by those who want the truth. Her apartment building has a small memorial near the front door. People leave flowers and pens there to honor her memory today. The case proved that the truth is a very dangerous thing. It can make powerful men do very desperate and evil acts. The silence of the hallway is a heavy thing. A pen and a notepad lying on a bloody floor. This was the final image of a life spent writing. The police eventually closed the file, but the questions remain. The investigators moved on, but the families still feel the pain. We leave the cold and dark hallways of Moscow behind. We are moving from the silent city to a war zone. The air is thick with smoke and the sound of fire. A red dome reflects the morning sun in the distance. The camera travels toward the city of Islamabad in Pakistan. We see a massive mosque complex surrounded by heavy army tanks. The sound of chanting from inside is replaced by explosions today. This is the siege of the Red Mosque, and it is war. Students are trapped inside, while the military moves closer to walls. The world is watching as a city becomes a battlefield now. We are moving from a single hit to a massacre. The smoke is rising into the hot blue sky. The camera leaves the frozen streets of Moscow and heads south. It travels over the mountains toward the city of Islamabad now. We find ourselves in the capital of Pakistan this morning. The air is hot and smells like dust and grass. We see a massive red dome reflecting the bright sun. This is the Lal Masjid, or the famous Red Mosque. It is a place meant for prayer and deep study. But today, it is surrounded by heavy army tanks today. The sound of loud explosions fills the air of city. A city is held hostage by a mosque's private morality police. For months, these young men have patrolled the local streets. They carry heavy sticks and wear dark masks over faces. They kidnap citizens they believe are not following the rules. The government has tried to ignore the growing problem for long. But now the mosque has been turned into a fortress. There are thousands of people trapped inside the high walls. The military has cut off the power and the water. They are waiting for the final order to attack now. When does a religious school turn into a military fortress? This was the question that the whole world was asking. The Red Mosque was once a place for young students. They came from the countryside to learn and to pray. But now there are snipers positioned on the high minarets. Thousands of rounds of ammunition are hidden in the basement. The peaceful halls are filled with men carrying assault rifles. The students have become human shields for a violent cause. A major bloodbath is about to begin in Pakistan soon. The story goes back to July of 2007. This was a time of great tension in the city. The Red Mosque was run by two very powerful brothers. They were known for their extreme views on the law. They had built a massive following among the local poor people. Their school was the largest of its kind in the region. But they were no longer just teaching from the books. They were training a private army to fight the government. They wanted to impose their own rules on the whole city. The two brothers were named Abdul Aziz and Abdul Rashid. They had inherited the mosque from their father years ago. For a long time, they were seen as holy men, but they began to speak about a holy war often. They told their students that the state was their enemy. They started to stockpile weapons and food inside the large complex. They were preparing for a final showdown with the army. The neighbors watched as sandbags were placed in the windows. The quiet neighborhood was becoming a dark and dangerous war zone. Thousands of students lived inside the walls of the mosque. Most of them were very young and from the villages. They believed everything the two brothers told them to do. They spent their days chanting and learning how to fight. The girls at the school were also part of this. They wore dark veils and carried long wooden sticks on patrol. They would go into the local markets to harass vendors. They wanted to shut down every shop that sold music. The local people were terrified of these young religious police. The trigger for the siege happened in early July of that year. The mosque police kidnapped several Chinese workers from a shop. They claimed the workers were doing something against their faith. This was a major mistake because it angered the whole government. The president ordered the military to surround the entire mosque complex. They brought in elite commandos and heavy artillery to the site. They gave the brothers a chance to surrender peacefully today. But the men inside the red walls refused to come out. The military blockade was total and very cold in its execution. They set up checkpoints every few hundred feet around the mosque. They used loudspeakers to talk to the students inside. They told them that they would be safe if they left. A few hundred students tried to run out of the gates, but the leaders inside the mosque started to fire at them. They did not want anyone to leave the school alive. They wanted to use the children as a shield for safety. The situation was becoming a terrible human tragedy now. The crime scene of the siege was a place of fire. The army began to fire tear gas into the windows. They wanted to force the students out of the buildings. But the snipers on the roof fired back with rifles. The sound of automatic gunfire echoed through the empty streets tonight. Smoke rose from the red dome as the library burned. The students inside were trapped with no food or water. They were hiding in the basements and under the stairs. It was a nightmare of their own leaders' making. The investigation into the mosque revealed a very dark secret. The police realized that the leaders had been planning this. They found tunnels that led to houses in the neighborhood. These paths were used to bring in food and more guns. The brothers had enough supplies to last for several months. They were waiting for a massive uprising in the city. They hoped the public would join them against the army today, but the people of Islamabad were tired of the violence. They wanted the siege to end so they could live. The turning point came when the negotiations failed for good. The government sent in a group of respected holy men. They tried to talk the brothers into a peaceful exit. They spent hours on the phone with Abdul Rashid Ghazi, but he told them he would rather die than give up. He said that the blood of the students was a sacrifice. The holy men walked away with tears in their eyes. They knew that a massacre was now the only option. The army commanders began to check their watches for time. The reenactment of the final assault was a brutal event. Special forces breached the thick walls with heavy plastic explosives. They moved from room to room with their flashlights on. They faced heavy fire from the men in the hallways. The students were caught in the crossfire as they hid. The commandos had to move slowly through the dark smoke. They found Abdul Rashid in the basement with his men. He refused to put down his gun and was killed. The fight for the Red Dome was finally over. Now let us pause for a moment and really think. I want you to look at the deep irony. A place built for the soul became a factory. People went there to find peace, but found a grave. The very walls meant to protect them became a trap. I do not know about you, but that is haunting. We think of certain places as being safe and holy, but even the most sacred space can be twisted. It shows how easily a good intention can be broken. The mosque was a tomb for the young. The conclusion of the siege was a very grim count. Over 100 people were killed in the final fight. Most of them were young students who followed their leaders. The mosque was a ruin of broken stone and bullet holes. The government claimed that they had saved the city from war. But many people were angry about the loss of life. They saw the students as innocent victims of a big lie. The Red Dome was no longer a symbol of faith. It was a symbol of a very dark tragedy. The legal outcome of the case was a wave of revenge. The death of the leader triggered a series of bombings. Radical groups across the country vowed to attack the state. Suicide bombers targeted police stations and local army convoys today. The siege had ended, but the war was just beginning. It was the start of the deadliest year in history. The government struggled to keep the peace in the cities. The Red Mosque had left a scar that would not heal. The cycle of violence was now in motion. The aftermath of the case changed the country of Pakistan. The military took a much harder line against the groups. They started to monitor every religious school in the region. They wanted to make sure that another fortress was not built. The Red Mosque was eventually rebuilt and opened again later, but the atmosphere inside the walls was never the same. People remembered the smell of the smoke and the gunfire. They remembered the students who never came home to their parents. The history of the dome was stained. A white flag of surrender was found in the dirt. It had been stepped on by the soldiers during the fight. It was a sign that peace was offered but refused. The police eventually cleared the rubble, and the street opened. We leave the smoke of Islamabad and travel far west. We are moving from the chaos of war to a mall. The air is cool, and the sound of music plays. A teenager is walking through a department store with a bag. He is looking for a place to stand. The camera travels across the ocean to the state of Nebraska. We see a quiet shopping mall decorated for the holidays. People are buying gifts for their families and their friends. The atmosphere is light and the children are laughing often. But a young man in a blue sweatshirt is moving. He has a rifle hidden under his clothes and a plan. He is looking for a way to become famous tonight. He is moving toward the balcony of the third floor. The music is playing a soft and happy song. We leave the smoke of the Red Mosque in Pakistan. The camera travels across the world to the heart of America. We are in the city of Omaha in the state of Nebraska. The air is cool and smells like pine and winter wind. It is early December, in 2007 today. Christmas music is playing in the large Westroads Mall. People are carrying bags and looking at the bright holiday lights. The atmosphere is light and filled with the joy of the season. No one notices the young man in the blue sweatshirt. The young man stands on the third floor balcony of a store. He is looking down at the shoppers on the floors below. He has a semi-automatic rifle hidden in a customized shirt. He does not say a word to the people passing him. He reaches for the weapon and begins to fire into the crowd. The festive music is suddenly drowned out by the loud cracks. People scream and drop their bags as they run for cover. The shooter moves with a cold and very mechanical focus. He is looking for his moment of fame. A teenager stands on a balcony with a rifle in hand. He is only 19 years old and looks very ordinary. But he has just turned a happy place into a scene. 8 innocent people lie still among the holiday decorations tonight. Many others are wounded and crying out for help in the aisles. The shooter has achieved the violence he wanted to see. Why did he want to go out in a style like this? This question would haunt the people of Nebraska for years. The tragedy was about to change the country forever. The story goes back to December 5th in 2007. Omaha was a quiet city where people felt very safe. The Westroads Mall was the most popular place for shopping. Families gathered there every day to eat and to visit stores. But a young man named Robert Hawkins was in a dark place. He had recently lost his job at a fast food restaurant. His girlfriend had broken up with him just a few weeks ago. He felt like a total failure in his own young life. Robert Hawkins was a young man who lived in a house. His friends said he was a very quiet and shy person. He spent most of his time on his computer in the dark. He read blogs and talked to people he never met online. He felt a deep sense of anger toward the whole world. He believed that no one understood his pain or his thoughts. He began to write about his feelings in a public blog. He spoke about his desire to do something big and dark. He wanted everyone to know his name. The day of the shooting was a normal Wednesday for the mall. The Von Moore department store was busy with many holiday shoppers. Robert Hawkins arrived at the mall in his old car alone. He walked through the main doors with his rifle concealed. He took the elevator up to the third floor of the store. He found a spot near the railing that overlooked the atrium. He waited for a few minutes and looked at his own watch. Then he pulled the weapon out and began the nightmare. The scene inside the Von Moore store was absolute chaos. People were hiding behind the clothing racks and the glass counters. Employees were trying to lead the shoppers to the back rooms. The sound of the gunfire echoed through the high open spaces. Robert moved along the balcony and continued to pull the trigger. He did not seem to care who he hit that day. He was looking for a way to end his own life too. He wanted to go out in a blaze of dark glory. The first responders arrived at the Westroads Mall within minutes. Police officers ran into the store with their weapons drawn. They heard the final shots coming from the third floor balcony. They found the shooter lying still on the floor near the rail. Robert Hawkins had taken his own life with his last bullet. The building was evacuated as the medical teams rushed inside. They found a scene of total devastation among the holiday gifts. 8 people were dead, and 4 others were very badly wounded. The investigation into the shooting began in the digital world. FBI agents seized the computer and the phone of the shooter. They wanted to understand the motivations of Robert Hawkins clearly. They found a suicide note left on a kitchen table at home. He wrote that he wanted to be famous and go out. He said that he was sorry for the pain he caused, but he also wrote that he felt he had no other choice. He had planned the massacre for several weeks in secret. The detectives analyzed the digital footprint of the young man. They found that he was part of a dark online community. He shared manifestos and talked about his hatred for society. These posts revealed a very deep sense of nihilism and anger. He felt that his life had no meaning and no real future. He believed that a mass shooting would make him a legend. The FBI realized that this was a new kind of threat. The internet was giving a voice to the most dangerous people. The critical turning point came from his online blog posts. Robert had written about the incel and nihilist ideas often. He felt that he was a victim of a very unfair world. He wanted to punish the people who seemed to be happy. This was one of the first cases where the web was a clue. It showed how a person could be radicalized in their room. The tragedy highlighted the danger of isolated young men online. The mall was just the stage for his digital rage. The reenactment of the crime was a chilling look at the day. Robert had practiced with the rifle in the woods recently. He had customized a blue sweatshirt to hide the long barrel. He walked past a security guard without being stopped at all. He took the time to find the best vantage point for hit. He wanted to make sure that he could see the whole store. He fired his first shot at exactly 2 o'clock in day. He was a monster created by his own dark thoughts. Now let us pause for a moment and really think about this. I want you to consider the nature of the human spirit. We live in a world that is more connected than ever. We can talk to anyone across the globe in a second. But a young man sat in his room and felt totally alone. He chose to destroy the lives of innocent people for fame. I do not know about you, but that fact is truly chilling. The internet gave a monster a voice before he acted. The legal outcome was a formal closure because he was dead. Since Robert died by his own hand, there was no trial. The families of the victims were left to pick up pieces. They struggled to understand how a teenager could do this. The store was closed for several weeks out of deep respect. When it reopened, it had a new sense of heavy security. The tragedy left a scar on the city of Omaha forever. People still remember the names of the 8 who fell. The aftermath of the case changed how the world views threat. It showed that the lone wolf could be born on the internet. Police departments began to monitor social media for red flags. They wanted to stop the next Robert Hawkins before he moved. The Westroads Mall shooting remains a very dark part of history. It is a reminder that evil can hide in a blue sweatshirt. The holiday music at the mall has a different sound. The silence in the Von Moore store is very heavy. A suicide note left on a kitchen table was the final image. It was a piece of paper that held a very dark heart. The signatures of the victims were recorded in the cold files. The police eventually finished their work, and the mall opened. We leave the quiet aisles of the store behind us tonight. The stories are over, and the night is very still now. The rain is still falling on the window of your room. It is time for us to find some rest. Thank you for spending your time with me tonight. I know these stories are dark and they can be heavy. I appreciate you listening to the accounts of these people. Please remember to subscribe if you want to hear more cases. Your support means everything to me and the whole channel. I hope you can find some peace in the quiet night. Take a deep breath and let the weight of the day go. You are safe and you are warm in your bed now. Gently close your eyes if you want to drift off to sleep. The sound of the rain is a steady and soft curtain. It washes over the roof and the glass of the window. You are wrapped in heavy blankets and you are very warm. Feel the weight of your body pressing into the soft bed. Your breathing is slow and very steady in the dark room. The world outside is quiet and the night is very long. There is nothing you need to do but rest now. The rain is just a soft whisper in the dark of night. It falls on the leaves and the grass in the garden. Each drop is a small and calming sound for your ears. You are moving deeper into a very peaceful and dark place. The images of the day are fading away from your mind. Only the sound of the water remains with you in room. You are safe from the storms and the shadows outside. Your mind is clear and your heart is very light. Focus on the sound of the rain hitting the glass pane. It is a gentle rhythm that never changes or stops now. It is like a lullaby that the earth is singing to you. The room is dark and the shadows are soft and kind. You are sinking into the mattress and feeling very light. The tension in your shoulders is gone and you are calm. There is a deep peace in the silence of the night. You are drifting away into a dreamless and deep sleep. Imagine a soft light in the corner of your quiet room. It is a warm and golden glow that feels very safe. It matches the steady rhythm of your own heart tonight. The air is cool and the blankets are soft and dry. You are far away from the stories and the dark paths. You are in a place where only peace and rest exist. The sound of the rain is the last thing you hear. It is a soft and steady song for your soul. Sleep now and let the darkness hold you in its arms. The night is a friend that brings you to a new day. There are no more worries and no more thoughts to think. Just the sound of the water and the warmth of the bed. You are moving into the deep and quiet part of sleep. The world is far away and you are finally home. Rest your head and let the dreams take you away. The rain will watch over you until the sun rises.